I'm fascinated by the use of the word volunteer, and I know it's a word that they use that these actors use for themselves. But I'm interested in your analysis of the word volunteer and how the meaning of this word has changed over the course of events, and how flexible it is. Right? I mean, can someone be a volunteer if they just go deliver some supplies? Or do you have to be a volunteer? Do you have to commit to a certain amount of time to be a volunteer, right? So what is the sort of spectrum of this concept of the volunteer? That's for both of you. And then for Yulia, I was so intrigued by this idea of emotions as an explanatory variable. And I think that's so interesting. But then I was thinking too about the milieu of the hospital in general. I mean, outside of this hospital, but just a hospital in general, and the wide variety of emotions one sees in a hospital, right? And that are the emotive affect of volunteers in any hospital, that of a mother and a caretaker, and not showing tears of pity. And in other words, I guess very specifically, how is this case typical, and how is it different from other cases? And you mentioned briefly this work in Dnipropetrovsk, and so is there a comparative element to your research? Thank you both.
Okay, so on the question on the usage of the term volunteers, it's actually very interesting, because many volunteers said that when they initially started helping out the army or IDPs, they wouldn't call themselves volunteers. The terminology was not there. They would just help. And then maybe a month or two later, the term would emerge, and they would use it to indicate any kind of engagement aimed at helping out those affected by war. But when I was present in Odessa, specifically on Odessa in the summer of 2015, there was some sort of contestation of this term. Can actually anyone be called a volunteer? Again, like, does it require a certain kind of commitment and time to carry this title, or is it anyone who helps out, let's say 1 or 2 hours a week? I think volunteers, those like total engagement that Yulia was referring to, volunteers totally engaged in volunteering. We're trying to preserve maybe a little bit this term, and cut away those who would try to maybe name themselves volunteers but wouldn't be fully engaged. So come and help once a week or twice a week. And there would be this almost a competition who can be called volunteer, like what is like the legitimacy of the usage of this term. And one time when I was conducting an interview with one of the volunteers, a potential volunteer showed up and he wanted to join, and it was a well-developed network of volunteers, and he asked, what does it take to join? And they said, well, start your own volunteering network, like you just want to join when everything is already organized and ready. So there was this contestation a little bit and competition. So I think it's something to think about, how the term evolved and how it's been contested. And because volunteering itself has been associated with a high level of social legitimacy and support, so a lot of people try to, let's say, hijack the term. So there is more attention on kind of preserving the purity of the term, if I can put it that way.
The term of volunteer, I would refer to the group, actually, the Sister of Mercy, and the way they use this term. They are proud to name themselves volunteer, and they use this term of volunteering. But what I see in the practice is it's very flexible. There is no requirement in terms of presence. There are only 2 persons who are on permanent basis in this volunteering room, and all the others are moving depending on their.
So are they getting a salary? The
No.
permanent? No.
No, of course no. And the others who know, they come when they can. Those who cannot, they come just on the weekends or in the evenings, right after the job. So there is a fluidity and very flexible hours within the group. Just maybe to specify the term of total engagement. Total doesn't mean permanent in terms of time. It's more in terms of investment in what you are doing emotionally. Yes. So it's a bit different. You may just come for several hours, but being totally engaged also in this kind of activities. And concerning your question, comparison with with other hospitals, I think Kharkiv Hospital is particular. If we compare it to Kyiv, it's just Kharkiv and Kyiv. So you have the capital, where you have a military hospital also in the middle of the city, and you have the first capital, yeah, where money there was less budget subsidies to the hospital, and so there is a difference when you go to the premises. Even if in Kharkiv also, volunteers of course made repair works, pay for medication and etc. And in comparison to Dnipropetrovsk, I was in Dnipropetrovsk in the October 2014, and as I understood, there were already many investments by the governor at that moment and the team of his advisors. And the hospital is not military initially, so they had more money and possibilities to take money from private surgery, for example. So those conditions are different, and it has also implications in terms of relationship with the soldiers. Why in Kharkiv it's so intense also? Because soldiers are not allowed to quit the territory. It's a military unit. To the point that they cannot even go out to withdraw money, for example, and it's an additional activities for sisters also. They assist them in different things they have to do outside, but they can't actually just exit. And as concerning your question, emotive effect, I think going to a hospital, see poor premises and poor people, of course it's emotively strong, affects everyone. But nobody came there, and it's war also who pushed them, to come to see and to invest in those kind of activities.
A quick question to both. In terms of male and female roles, were males and females performing different roles as volunteers? And were there different psychologies behind them in terms of commitment and activity and thinking about it? Secondly, did having some sort of connection to the ATO, friends, relatives, whatever, fighting, increase the chance of a person being a volunteer? And then 2 very quick comments. In terms of professional and volunteer conflict, I've worked in NGOs in obscure parts of Canada, and you get them everywhere and in every place. They are universal. The only question here is it's a much higher risk element.
For traditional roles, for example, I hope Dominique will invite me next year, so I will address this question. Now, it's difficult for me. It's a new object also for me of research. I've been, just to see my trajectory and how Euromaidan, it's in the kind of transition to the next session, changed my research trajectory. I've been working on parliamentary practices in Ukraine before Euromaidan, with also this ethnographic approach, but it was on elites actually. And I found myself working on ordinary people and civic engagement. So definitely traditional roles, being a woman, all those traditional tasks carrying of women, all those are there. I just need, I think, to, just to sit, to think, and then to present something more solid.
Hi, thank you guys so much. I've actually been looking forward to this all weekend, so I was really excited about your presentations. And I had a question. So I was interested to hear about the connection of sort of Maidan networks developing into towards these voluntary organizations, which is something I also heard from people even in Kiev when I was there last summer doing interviews. And that I'm really, really interested in learning more about. So one of the things that I wondered, since you guys are working with local organizations, particularly in the East, is whether there is any sort of connection between the voluntary organizations that are developing at the local level like between organizations in different places, whether that means, is there a formal network of these organizations across the country or across localities in eastern Ukraine or whatever, whether it means, are they actively reaching out nationally? For example, when you talk about fundraising on Facebook, are they making attempts to do that? Is that mostly coming from the local community or from outside? So I guess sort of in whatever way you can think of, are there connections of these local organizations outside of the local community, or is everything happening locally?
I think it's both. I think a lot of the fundraising efforts happen locally, but they do reach out. For example, this, as I mentioned, some Samoborona units that were formed during Maidan, and they regionally they were diverse very often. So people would return to their hometowns, but they would still keep the connections, and they would fundraise across the regions. And they would also, what I found, because it's much further to travel, let's say from Ternopil to Luhansk or Donetsk to the ATO zone than it is to travel from Kharkiv. They would find ways to ship their goods off to Kharkiv, and then volunteers from Kharkiv would go and actually deliver the supplies. So there is a lot of cross-region cooperation happening that emerged during Maidan. And the same for, and at the level of institutionalization of these networks is really different. Some of them function as informal networks, really friendship ties that emerge out of Maidan. Some of them have become much more formal, like, for example, the provision of psychological help to those that have been wounded. There are actually workshops, trainings organized for psychologists and psychiatrists who work with people who've been through traumatic experiences, and it's much more, like professionalized and institutionalized at this point.
Yeah, if I add just from the point of the group system of Mercy, it's more on the level of personal ties, but it's go beyond Kharkiv, of course, because they know volunteers from different hospitals. But there is no kind of coordination or more broader cooperation or something. It's just helping each other in case a wounded, for example, transferred from one hospital to another. But there is a good coordination, and Natalia maybe knows better than me. Kharkiv Euromaidan, they remain rather active, rather connected, all of those people, and just can provide you an example. Rehabilitation Monday, I was in Kharkiv, so I saw repair work they were doing in a building where a rehabilitation center will be opened, and there were Samoborona, self-defense of Kharkiv, helping them to do so. So I think it's those Euromaidan Kharkiv connections also.